Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're tackling something a bit thorny. We're usually told forgiveness is a virtue, right? It's liberating, it's healing, it's the high road. You forgive, you let go, you move on. Sounds lovely, almost too lovely sometimes. But what if that's only half the story? What if, in certain contexts, forgiveness isn't strength but a strategic blunder? What if it's a luxury you can't always afford, especially when power, reputation, or even survival are on the line? That's where a certain Florentine diplomat from 500 years ago enters the chat. Niccolo Machiavelli. Yeah, that guy. The one whose name became shorthand for cunning, manipulation, and political hardball. We're going to look at the concept of forgiveness through a lens darkly, a Machiavellian lens, and ask, is forgiveness sometimes a trap? Now, before you click away thinking this is just an edgelord rant about being mean, stick around. This isn't about advocating cruelty. It's about peeling back the layers of a complex human act, questioning our assumptions and exploring the uncomfortable intersection of ethics and reality. It's about understanding the power dynamics inherent in forgiveness, or the lack thereof. Because understanding those dynamics, that's real power. Setting the scene. Who was this Machiavelli anyway? So who was Niccolo Machiavelli, and why should we care what he thought about, anything related to forgiveness? He wasn't exactly writing self-help guides. Born in Florence in 1469, Machiavelli lived during the Italian Renaissance, a period of incredible artistic and intellectual flourishing, but also brutal political instability. City-states were constantly vying for power, alliances shifted like sand, and leaders rose and fell with alarming frequency. It was a high-stakes game, and Machiavelli was right in the thick of it. He served as a diplomat and official for the Florentine Republic. He saw firsthand how power really worked, not how philosophers said it should work in an ideal world, but how it operated in the messy, often ruthless reality of human ambition and conflict. Then his political fortunes turned. The Medici family returned to power. Machiavelli was accused of conspiracy, imprisoned, tortured, and eventually exiled from Florence. It was during this forced retirement, around 1513, that he wrote his most famous and infamous work, The Prince il Principe. The Prince wasn't a philosophical treatise on the ideal state. It was a pragmatic, almost shockingly blunt handbook for rulers on how to gain and maintain power. He argued that a ruler must be willing to act immorally, to lie, to cheat, even to use violence, if necessity required it to preserve the state and their own position. It wasn't about being evil for its own sake. It was about effectuality. He introduced concepts like virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but skill, strength, decisiveness, adaptability, and fortuna, fortune, luck, the unpredictable chaos of events. A good ruler uses their virtue to master fortuna as much as possible. So, Machiavelli's world was one where idealism often led to ruin. He observed that rulers who tried to be consistently good in the Christian sense, merciful, forgiving, always truthful, were often overthrown by those less scrupulous. His core message, deeply unsettling to many then and now, was that politics has its own rules separate from conventional morality. To succeed, you had to understand and play by those rules. Now, did Machiavelli write a chapter titled, Why Forgiveness is for Losers? No. But his entire framework, his emphasis on realism, on anticipating threats, on the paramount importance of maintaining power and control, casts a long, cold shadow over the uncomplicated virtue of forgiveness. The Machiavellian critique, forgiveness as strategic error. Let's dissect this. From a purely Machiavellian perspective, focused on power and survival, when might forgiveness look less like strength and more like, asking for trouble? 1. Signaling weakness, not magnanimity. In a world governed by power dynamics, which, let's be honest, includes more than just Renaissance Italy, actions are signals. Machiavelli understood this implicitly. While appearing merciful could sometimes be useful, we'll get to that, actually forgiving someone who has wronged you, especially a rival or someone who poses a threat, can send a dangerous message. It can signal that you're unwilling or unable to defend your interests. It might suggest you lack the resolve to punish transgressions. In a political arena, a business negotiation, or even certain social hierarchies, this perceived weakness can be an invitation for further challenges. Your rival might think, They let it slide once, they'll probably let it slide again. Forgiveness in this light isn't generosity, it's lowering your guard. Machiavelli famously advised the prince that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, because fear is a more reliable motivator based on the threat of punishment. Love is fickle, fear is constant. Forgiveness undermines fear. 2. Enabling repeat offenses. This follows directly from the first point. If someone has harmed you or betrayed you, especially in a way that reveals their character or intentions, forgiving them without a fundamental change in circumstances or their nature might simply be setting the stage for a repeat performance. Machiavelli was deeply skeptical about human nature. He believed people were generally self-interested, fickle, and potentially treacherous. Assuming someone will change just because you've forgiven them is, from his perspective, dangerously naive. He would likely argue that you must judge people by their past actions and their inherent interests, not by hopeful projections. If someone betrayed you to gain an advantage, why wouldn't they do it again if the opportunity arose and they perceived no significant cost? Forgiving them doesn't erase their ambition or change their calculation of risk and reward. It might just lower the perceived risk. Think about Cesare Borgia, whom Machiavelli observed and admired for his ruthlessness and effectiveness. Borgia dealt decisively with his enemies and disloyal captains at Sinigalia. He lured them in with promises, then had them strangled. Not exactly forgiving, was it? But it secured his power, at least for a time. Machiavelli saw this not as monstrous evil, but as necessary virtue in a dangerous situation. 3. The illusion of moving on. When the threat persists, we often talk about forgiveness as a way to move on and achieve personal peace. And for purely personal wounds, where the other person poses no ongoing threat, that can be profoundly true and healthy. But in situations involving ongoing competition, rivalry, or systemic injustice, moving on through forgiveness can be a form of denial. It can mean ignoring a persistent danger or an unresolved structural problem. If a competitor engaged in unethical practices to undermine your business, forgiving them doesn't change their business model or the competitive landscape. If a political faction used deceit to gain power, forgiving them doesn't mean they won't use deceit again. Machiavelli would urge a clear-eyed assessment of reality. Is the threat neutralized? Has the underlying dynamic actually changed? If not, then forgiveness might just be a comforting narrative you tell yourself while leaving yourself exposed. Holding on to the memory of the offense, not necessarily out of spite, but as crucial data about the other party's capabilities and intentions, is essential for strategic planning. Forgetting or pretending to forget through premature forgiveness is like deleting critical intelligence files. Beyond simple revenge, the psychology of not forgiving. It's easy to paint the refusal to forgive as purely vengeful or bitter, and sometimes it is. But looking through that Machiavellian lens, refusing to forgive can also stem from pragmatic, self-preserving impulses that aren't necessarily malicious. 1. Remembering the lesson. Sometimes the pain of a betrayal or injury carries a vital lesson. It teaches you about vulnerabilities in your own defenses, about misplaced trust, about the true nature of certain individuals or systems. To quickly forgive and forget can mean discarding that hard-won knowledge. Holding onto the memory of the wrong and the resolve not to let it happen again isn't the same as stewing in hatred. It's about integrating the experience into your future decision-making. It's a form of adaptive learning in a potentially hostile environment. Machiavelli, the ultimate political analyst, would value this kind of learning immensely. 2. Maintaining boundaries and reputation. Refusing to forgive can also be a way of establishing and enforcing boundaries. It sends a clear signal about what you will and will not tolerate. This is crucial for maintaining respect and deterring future transgressions, not just from the original offender, but from others who might be watching. A reputation for being someone who doesn't let serious offenses slide can be a powerful deterrent. It suggests you have self-respect and the will to defend your interests. Conversely, a reputation for easy forgiveness might, in some circles, translate to being seen as a pushover. Again, this echoes Machiavelli's point about fear versus love. A ruler, or anyone in a position requiring authority or respect, needs subjects or colleagues or rivals to understand there are consequences for disloyalty or attack. 3. Acknowledging unchanged reality. Sometimes forgiveness feels inappropriate not because you're clinging to anger, but because nothing is fundamentally changed. The person person hasn't shown remorse, hasn't made amends, or the circumstances that allowed the harm to occur are still in place. To offer forgiveness in such a situation can feel like validating the status quo or minimizing the wrong that occurred. It can feel like a disconnect from reality. Machiavelli was all about seeing things as they are, not as we wish they were. If the person who wronged you is still, fundamentally, the same person likely to do it again, or if the system that enabled them is unchanged, then withholding forgiveness can be an act of acknowledging that reality, even if it's uncomfortable. It's a refusal to participate in a fiction. But wait, could forgiveness ever be Machiavellian? Now let's add a layer of complexity. Would Machiavelli never see a use for forgiveness, or at least the appearance of forgiveness? Probably not. Remember, he was a pragmatist, not an ideologue of cruelty. Everything was a tool to be used wisely. 1. Forgiveness as a calculated tool. If forgiving someone, or more likely, appearing to forgive someone, serves a strategic purpose, then a Machiavellian actor might absolutely employ it. Winning allies. Forgiving a lesser offense committed by a potential ally could secure their loyalty, especially if they feel indebted or relieved. Public image. Appearing magnanimous and merciful can bolster a leader's reputation among the populace, making them seem benevolent, even if their private actions are ruthless. This is about managing perception, a key element of power. De-escalation. Sometimes pursuing vengeance or holding a grudge is simply too costly. It might provoke a wider conflict or drain resources better used elsewhere. In such cases, a calculated act of forgiveness or truce might be the most rational, self-interested move to cut losses or redirect energy. Lulling an enemy. A feigned forgiveness could even be used to lower an enemy's guard before striking decisively later. A tactic Machiavelli would certainly understand, if not universally endorse, as it relies on breaking one's word, which has its own costs. The key difference is the motivation. Forgiveness here isn't driven by empathy, moral principle, or a desire for personal healing. It's driven by a cold calculation of advantage. It's instrumental. 2. Distinguishing private feeling from public act. Machiavelli might also implicitly distinguish between the internal feeling of forgiveness and the external act. You might privately recognize the harm done, retain your wariness and learn your lesson, but publicly make a show of reconciliation if it serves your interests. The prince must be a great pretender and dissembler, Machiavelli wrote. This applies here too. The internal ledger of trust and threat assessment remains unchanged, even if the public performance suggests otherwise. The climax. The real warning isn't never forgive, it's think so. What's the ultimate takeaway from filtering forgiveness through Machiavelli's cynical, power-focused worldview? Is it that we should all become paranoid, calculating cynics who never forgive anyone? No, I don't think that's the real insight. The true Machiavellian warning, if we can call it that, isn't a blanket prohibition on forgiveness. It's a stark reminder that forgiveness, like any significant human action, operates within a context of power, interests, and consequences. The warning is against naive forgiveness, against the kind of automatic, unthinking forgiveness that ignores reality, fails to learn from experience, and potentially leaves you vulnerable. It's a warning against mistaking a feeling of personal release for a change in external circumstances or in the nature of others. Machiavelli forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What are the real motivations behind this act of forgiveness, mine and theirs? What are the likely consequences of forgiving versus not forgiving in this specific situation? Does forgiving this person or group make me or my interests or my community safer or more vulnerable? Is this forgiveness based on genuine change and accountability, or is it wishful thinking? Am I confusing personal emotional processing with strategic interaction? He rips away the comforting blanket of simple moral prescriptions and exposes the complex, often harsh machinery of human interaction, especially when stakes are high. He tells us that to survive and thrive, especially in competitive environments, we need to be clear-eyed realists. We need discernment. The real power play, then, isn't just about knowing when not to forgive. It's about developing the wisdom to understand the difference between forgiveness that heals and empowers, and forgiveness that blinds and endangers. It's about knowing when the high road leads to a better place, and when it leads off a cliff. Machiavelli's world of ambitious princes and unstable republics might seem distant, but the dynamics he described, the interplay of trust and betrayal, the calculation of risk, the importance of reputation, the potential conflict between morality and necessity, these are timeless. They play out in boardrooms, in political campaigns, in online communities, and yes, us even in our personal relationships. Conclusion: your turn to wrestle with the ghost of Machiavelli. So we've walked through the shadows with Machiavelli, exploring the unsettling idea that forgiveness isn't always the strength we're told it is. From his perspective, grounded in the brutal realities of power politics, forgiveness can be a strategic error, a signal of weakness, or a dangerous denial of reality. But we also saw that even for a pragmatist, forgiveness, or its appearance, could be a calculated tool. The core message isn't a simple "don't forgive." It's a demand for realism, for discernment, for understanding the power dynamics at play before you make a move, whether that move is forgiveness or holding firm. Machiavelli doesn't give us easy answers. He gives us hard questions. He challenges us to think critically about one of our most cherished virtues. He forces us to confront the possibility that sometimes the path to safety and effectiveness lies not in easy absolution, but in clear-eyed vigilance and the memory of lessons learned. Now, this is obviously complex and probably bumps up against some deeply held beliefs, which is good. That's where the interesting thinking happens. So, I turn it over to you. What do you think? Is there a wisdom in Machiavelli's implied warning? When have you seen forgiveness act as strength? And when has it seemed like weakness or naivete? Where do you draw the line between personal healing and strategic reality? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This is definitely a topic worth wrestling with. If you found this dive into the uncomfortable side of ethics interesting, maybe give the video a like and consider subscribing for more explorations of philosophy in the real world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and maybe keep a little bit of Machiavellian realism in your back pocket, just in case.